Um, this is a good day because although we have been in stealth, my new company, we just announced, coming out of stealth like last week. So a new company name up there is called LivingCities, and I'm not really going to be talking about the company or the product. We're really going to stick to merging the virtual and the physical world together, which is something that we're working on in the new company. What I want to touch on today is, obviously our company with our logo, is the team that we've pulled together to work on this, because this is kind of what excites me. Like, some people may know my background. I had a company prior to this called 6D.ai that was acquired by Niantic and was kind of part of their Lightship platform now. So I've had a decade or more, 12 years, trying to think about the technology around how do you capture reality with devices. And my two friends who are starting the company with and who are here are John Gada. And John has a long career, both in AR and mixed reality, but mostly in visual effects and filmmaking. And John spent, the last 10, 20 years of his career thinking, how do we create these virtual worlds and make them feel real, in terms of a creative and a storytelling point of view. And Dennis, he co-founded Foursquare. And so Dennis has spent the last 20 years of his life also trying to figure out, how does software affect how we interact with the real world socially? So the three of us, I think, I find really exciting. The conversations we have are really, we bring a very unique perspective onto this single problem around, the virtual world, the software world, and the real world. How do they sort of intermingle and how do they merge? And what does that mean? Where's it going? And so the thing I think not many people talk about, or I definitely haven't heard too many talks, in 10 years of these conferences, is really about the real world. A lot of people talk about the technology, the graphics, the computer vision, the devices, whatever, but I want to talk today a little bit more about what does it mean to sort of on the real world side of things. And one of the most interesting sort of imbalances, I guess, is that compared to the metaverse, which is infinite, you can have in this place right now, you could have an infinite layers of content, but the physical world is only one place and time right now. And so that difference between the scarcity and the constraints of the real world, when they connect to the infinite possibility of the metaverse, is where things get really, really interesting. And so over the last 6 months or so, as we've been pushing around our product ideas, trying to figure out what's technically possible, what isn't technically possible, what's going to be interesting to people, how do we reach a lot of people with this idea that we're working on. We've really kind of pushed hard on what makes the real world special and how do you actually expose that and connect that to the real world. And so I want to touch on a lot of that today. And I think the big thing for us is that when you're building software, particularly social software that's going to affect our lives, it's not the place that matters as much as the people, the person, us. And so much of what is sort of pushed out there as metaverse products or social products, they don't really touch on that aspect of who we are is actually a function of the place we're in. Like, how I behave at this conference is different to how I behave when I'm at home with my family or when I'm out at a picnic or out at a bar in the evening. And so that sense of the place we're in actually changes who we are and how we behave. And so you can't just build an empty virtual box and expect people to be, to bring themselves there, because they're leaving that context behind. And we just found that really fascinating in that we're all keen to really touch on not the technology, but upon us and what is it about us that helps us connect and communicate and express ourselves to each other and sort of live a richer and fuller life. And we deeply believe that it's the places that we're in are a sort of critical aspect of that. So we came up with, well, it turned out to be 9. We just sort of came up with a list and then counted. We call them 9 principles. I wrote a blog post on, or published a blog post on this, last week. There's a lot more, goes into a lot more depth. And although it was like my name on the publish button, it was definitely the result of like many conversations between our whole team and refining some of these things. And as we're going forward, these are the principles that we're keeping in mind and we're trying to embody in the products that we're making. And hopefully, if we're successful, we think it will really matter. So the first three is that, I touched on before, reality is scarce. That's, sort of self-evident in terms of, I described before, but what I think is interesting from a software platform point of view is that scarcity creates value. And that if there's, one of something, there's only one Mona Lisa, that's going to be more valuable than, all of the millions of posters that you could make of it. And we've seen, like particularly in the crypto world, there's been all these efforts to kind of create this artificial scarcity. Like I'm going to have one JPEG and I'm going to NFT, bundle it up and try and pretend that there's only one of these, even though you can right-click save it. And so that, I guess, tension of where is scarcity a good thing, where is it natural, where is abundance a good thing, where is abundance natural, all of those things exist in the real world, and trying to work through that, too much of a good thing, or how do you keep something, restricted so that it is valuable and has some, some use to people. That's a principle that we're really, working through and wanting to bring out. The next thing I think is probably the most important thing is that people are the killer app. By that, I'm sort of talking about we're in the early days of a platform shift. We've gone from offline to online, from online to mobile, and now from mobile to this new AR, XR, Metaverse, whatever it ends up being called. But there's sort of a lot, every major company is working on this shift. And in my career, I've been fortunate to sort of go through a couple of those from the inside. And when that happens, the thing I always get asked, like over and over again, like from when the web was new on PCs, when the mobile phones and internet was used, it's like, why would I want that? What's the killer app? What's the killer app? And what I learned is there usually is no killer app for a new platform. It's pretty much all the same use cases that we already do. It's communication and entertainment and productivity and all those sorts of things. But they really let us express ourselves in a new way that wasn't possible in the medium before. PCs let us, or the internet let us all connect to each other and start interacting in real time. Mobile let us be mobile. And some of this spatial and immersive stuff is going to let us express ourselves and do all the things we already do, but in this new way. And so when we're thinking about the products that we build and connecting physical places to virtual places, we don't want to get caught up in, wow, this tech is kind of cool, and look at the ray traced lighting, or look how accurate our computer vision is. It really comes down to how do we let people be people, and how do we let them do new things that couldn't be done on the old platform. And then tied into that, to a sense, is this idea of the spirit of place. This is just a term that you can Google, and really that gets to the core, we think, of why real places are more interesting than virtual places. And it's the sense that a place isn't just the geometry. Digital twins are talked about a lot as to, this is how the real world's going to be virtualized by a digital twin. But these digital twins are just really, they're a mesh and there's some texture, and it's sort of a dead, empty copy of a real place. It doesn't really embody that sense of, the history, the culture, the everything that's gone into that. And you can look anthropologically and see how our cultures are often a reflection of the country, the environment that's come out of. And so we think that, getting in touch with that spirit of a place and somehow exposing that is essential and critical to somehow merging the best bits of the real world into the virtual world. The next bit is lore is built in, and this was a point John sort of dropped on me, and it sort of just light bulb moment for me is he said he's worked on properties like The Matrix and Star Wars and all these kind of world famous fantasy worlds. And he explained to me just how hard it is to do that, how much work it takes to build a believable, fantasy world. And pointed out, like, if you look at something like Lord of the Rings, Tolkien probably spent way more time like just building the world and the lore of that world and the history of the world than he spent writing the plot of the story. And if you're building a virtual metaverse space and you don't have access to like existing IP like Star Wars, you've got to kind of invent that from scratch. And not only is it time consuming and difficult, it's very, very hard to get right. But when you're tapping into the real world, you kind of get that for free. Most places, or at least lots and lots of places in the real world, have just fascinating history and lore to them, like that truth can be stranger than fiction in lots of ways. And when you are trying to build content or build a virtual experience that wants to connect to the real world, that's just an amazing resource, amazing freebie, a head start that you get, that if you can kind of find these places that have lore and have something interesting to them and then bring that up, rather than trying to drop C-3PO into the middle of Times Square, you get something that's quite amazing and quite human. Last bit here is we talked about what sort of use cases are interesting, and we hear companies like social networks talk about social. We talk about communication, whether that's like texting or video calls, and also self-expression in a creative way, everything from like painting to playing music. But we sort of view them all as the same thing, and that's what we find the most interesting place to start. There's other use cases like just straight up gaming or enterprise or production, but that idea of how do people express themselves in a new medium, especially when this medium is, it's I think like John Riccatello touched earlier, it's real time and it's 3D and it's mostly social and all these things. But there's an additional component I think that we're finding interesting, is that AI is advancing so rapidly as a creative assistant, and we think there's so much potential there to help us express ourselves in this new medium with some of these new tools that are becoming available. Now, this next point, I've kind of, I don't know if I say I've given up on AR, after 12 years, but definitely come to the strong conviction that for a startup, for a new startup, this doesn't apply if you're Google or Apple or someone, that AR is the wrong place to start. You don't want to build an AR company. You want to build, like Hugo from Qualcomm mentioned earlier, AR is a feature of what you're building. And so we definitely have a ambition to reach lots and lots of people, where they are today with technology that's available today. Every startup's got like 18 to 24 months of runway. And we don't think that in that time frame, you're going to get compelling AR experiences that are available to hundreds of millions of people. So, consumers anyway. So we're sort of viewing AR as something that is kind of a little cherry on top, but the real experience, we're looking at traditional platforms, open web type platforms to start building this merged reality. And the last three is that reality it's dynamic and alive. And I mentioned like digital twins before being quite static. They don't feel real because they don't feel alive. And that ability to not just take a scan of a place and like put it out on a server, it actually needs to be a real-time connection, in both directions between the real world and the virtual world. And Facebook has their, or Meta has their sort of research product that they're talking about called Live Maps. And I think that's a great, succinct description of kind of this point, is that these maps or these sort of representations of reality really need to take as much of what's actually happening in the real world in real time and sort of bring it up and make that place feel as alive as it can be. Next point, like Dennis has a shirt, he's actually wearing it today, called Defend IRL, Defend Real Life. And we think that this is a sort of principle that just, I guess it's a values, that we have. Although, John worked on the Matrix for so long, we do not want to build the Matrix. We don't want to build this simulation of reality that we all crawl into our little pods and sort of inhabit it, as our life. We think that the potential of the metaverse and how it connects to reality should be just to make our real life better. It shouldn't be to sort of take us away. So we're really interested in the sort of features, the sort of capabilities that help you use these tools to actually live your real life better. And it's something I think Foursquare embodied really well, in that it was more about how do you How do you sort of have this social utility? How do you find, oh, here's where my friend's in this cafe right now next to me, or all my best friends say this is a great bar to go to, and it sort of helps you live your real life, although the software's doing that. And then the last one, I think, is kind of really important. We use this word reflections internally when we talk about the digital and the real, and it's why I kind of have another little problem with the term digital twin, and we don't think the virtual world needs to be or should be a twin, like a pixel-perfect copy of the real world. It's more a reflection. And if you think about that word reflection, it can mean like here's a mirror, and it is something that's almost indistinguishable, one from the other. But it could mean a reflection in a pond where you've got some ripples through there. It could be an expressionistic or an impressionistic sort of representation of reality. And so, we think, we joke around saying it's not so much a digital twin, they're more like brothers or siblings, from each other. They're similar, but not identical. And that, I think, opens up so many, creative possibilities to tap into, again, to who we are and how do we express ourselves in both directions. From the virtual world where you've got this infinite range of tools, you've got global reach, back down to, the real world and the constraints there. So that, I guess, space between something that is in the space of what is a reflection, we find that the most interesting sort of creative space to think about what we're building. So this is 9 principles that we're working on. We think that if we can embody all of these in the work that we do, we'll, I think, hopefully merge the virtual world and the real world in a way that really hasn't been possible before, and hopefully serve the purpose of not just being an amazing technical demo, but something that taps into each of us and helps us, express who we are. So that's all I had to talk. So thank you. We've got, if you want to continue the conversation, we have a Discord up and running. We've got our website and our Twitter account. And I'll pause there. This is something I can talk about for about 4 hours non-stop, but I'd love to give folks a chance to chat or ask questions and go for it. So thank you. Nobody? I wasn't that convincing. Someone. I'm sorry?
Let me repeat with the mic, sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned you were building on open web technologies. Is that opposed to an app?
Yeah, one of the interesting things about a platform shift, and this is kind of getting off the merging real world together, is that one of the challenges, I guess, of the mobile platform right now is that if you want to distribute your product, you kind of have to go through an app store, and that means the restrictions around what you can put in there, as well as the 30% tax that's on it, and where the web is an open platform. And so, although with mobile, the web definitely lost out to mobile apps and app stores and those walled gardens, we think that with a lot of the new like Web3 type technologies that are out there, we're not like cheerleaders on that bandwagon, but we definitely think it's there's a lot of potential to sort of tap into new ways of distribution, new ways of monetization, new ways to incentivize behavior, particularly when you've got a virtual economy and a real world economy that are overlapped. We think that's kind of, got a lot of interest for us. There's still some pretty tricky technology problems into how do you get an immersive, rich experience, distributed over the web, but we're working on those.
Hi Matt, thank you so much for the inspiring talk. I was a big fan of what you are doing with the 60 AI, and you were, copying the digital twin, exact digital twin of the real world. But I guess it will be, I like the philosophy as a reflection of a real world, not the exact same, but somehow you should get an input from the real world. And I guess you will be using the cameras of all we have, but can you give us some tips about the technologies that we'll use? I'm assuming you will be using some neural radiance fields to create something.
Yeah. So yeah, I touched on this a bit in my blog, and that one of the reasons I think the timing is right for what we're doing is in the last 12 months or so, we've seen a couple of technical trends all come together. One is NERF and neural radiant fields, and if you're not familiar with those, it's kind of the ability to pretty easily capture a 3D object or a 3D scene in really high visual fidelity, like truly photoreal. It doesn't look like a clunky Minecraft type of janky scan. They look amazing. We've also seen the sort of highest visual fidelity of like cinematic virtual production go from like custom companies, custom code, custom teams, down into game engines now, like off-the-shelf software with regular development teams. And then the game industry itself has moved to these new game engines so that like John Rictello mentioned before, and obviously Epic and Unreal are doing the same thing. All this stuff becomes real time, so it can become interactive. And all of those three things have happened, just in the last year or so. And we think that there's going to be a technical like step function in terms of what can be captured and what can be, reflected back, I guess, in terms of that, believability. And one thing we definitely learned at 6D, making the scanning software, is that if you represent to a consumer that this is reality, it needs to really look like reality. If it looks like a low fidelity type of copy, people just go, it's not a real thing. So we're kind of excited by that new ability to kind of start on this new level that wasn't possible a year ago.
Really enjoying the talk.
Thanks.
Good to see you, by the way. Question about scale. How do you think about scale in terms of object scale, person-to-person scale, block scale, building scale? Like how far apart your users might be? There are a lot of questions there that I'd love for you.
Yeah, so being in AR, for such a long time, I don't think about scale because I don't think that's the right problem to work on. I think that it's a hard problem, when I do think about it. I don't think a lot of these questions are answered, like MMOs and things are kind of solving it. This company's like Improbable kind of solving it. But I haven't met a single person ever in this world that said, my AR product is so successful, I can't keep up with scaling it. Scaling is my problem. Like no one has that problem. Everyone says, no one uses it, or someone uses it once and they never use it again. So that's the problem we're interested in. And we think if we can attack that problem at a very, we've consciously chosen as a team, a lot of very tight constraints so that we don't have to deal with scale. But it gives us enough space to really explore engagement and how do you get that, that spirit of place? How do you get that sense of expressing myself in a new medium? How do I feel something in these places? And we think if we can solve that problem and get engagement and sort of people passionate about what we're doing at a small scale, then we'll start thinking about how to solve the technical problems, because they generally are solvable or more easily solved, I think, than these other problems that honestly I haven't seen anybody solve them yet. So hope that was, probably not the answer you were hoping for, but yeah, that's how we think about it. Yeah.
Time for one.
Okay.
Is this on?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, so I noticed you mentioned MMO a couple times on your website, and you also mentioned people as the killer app. And with these beautiful spaces, one of the challenges is if you have 100 people in this huge city, it still feels like a ghost town. You also mentioned Improbable, there's Hadean. Are you guys working with partners for the massively multiplayer instancing solutions, or is that something you're approaching in a different way?
We are like a few months old as a company, and so we haven't even got our own internal demos up and working yet. So no, we're not working with any partners, and we are really trying to not depend on anyone else to solve this problem I just alluded to around engagement. I definitely think that, assuming we do solve it, we will certainly want or need partners, to help build that out. And one of the constraints we chose is not to have too big a geography, just so that it didn't feel like a ghost town, and so there would be inhabitants, both in the physical world and the virtual world, in this place.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. I think that was the last question. We'll be around, all AWE. Our Discord's there. We're present on that. You can ask any of us, direct questions. We'll always follow up. And thank you.